August 6th, 1945, 0815 hours. Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. A single decoded transmission from Hiroshima would shatter 3 years of carefully constructed illusions about industrial warfare. What the Japanese High Command read in that message would force them to confront a truth they had spent the entire war denying. America hadn't been fighting at full capacity. They had been holding back. The basement war room beneath the Imperial Palace sat 90 feet approximately, 27.5 meters underground, insulated by reinforced concrete walls 4 feet approximately, 1.2 meters thick. On the morning of August 6th, 1945, this airless space hummed with the familiar rhythm of a losing war, a rhythm that had become painfully familiar. Field Marshal Shinroku Hata's morning intelligence briefing had become a ritual of managed decline. At precisely 8:15 hours, Communications Officer Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto burst through the steel door without the customary formal bow, practically tearing it down. In his hands, he carried a decoded transmission that would fundamentally alter how Japan's military leadership understood the war they had been fighting. The message was fragmentary, a desperate cry transmitted by the Hiroshima Regional Military Command seconds before all communication lines went silent forever. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Unknown weapon type. Casualties catastrophic. Request immediate. The transmission had been cut off mid-sentence. General Yoshiro Umezu, chief of the Imperial General Staff, read the message 3 times. His mind scrambled to fit this horrifying information into a logical framework. His first assumption was that this must be the largest conventional bombing raid of the war, perhaps 500 American B-29s attacking simultaneously. The mathematics seemed impossible otherwise. Hiroshima was a massive city of 350,000 people spread across 27 square miles, 70 square kilometers. But additional reports arriving throughout the morning closed off this rational escape route. Weather reconnaissance had reported only and exclusively 3 B-29s over Hiroshima that morning, not 300. 3. Admiral Suimu Toyota, chief of the Naval General Staff, stood frozen at the massive wall map tracking every known American military asset in the Pacific. His intelligence staff had become exceptionally skilled at predicting American operations. They knew the bomber formations, the typical ordnance loads, the expected damage patterns by heart. But in 3 bloody years of air war, there was not a single indication that 3 aircraft could wipe an entire city off the map. By 1000 hours, reconnaissance flights attempting to reach Hiroshima reported something unprecedented, something inconceivable. Pilots described a mushroom-shaped cloud climbing over 40,000 feet, 12 kilometers, visible even from 150 miles, 240 kilometers away. The cloud glowed with colors they had never seen, with purples and oranges that seemed to churn and live, boiling within themselves. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo received the first eyewitness account at 11:30 hours. It was from a railway official who had been 15 miles, 24 kilometers, outside Hiroshima. The man's testimony, meticulously recorded by the minister's secretary, described a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, followed immediately by a horrific pressure wave that flung trains from their tracks. The most chilling part of the report was this. The man reported that the entire city center had simply vanished, replaced by a giant firestorm visible from the mountains. The afternoon meeting of the Supreme War Council convened at 1400 hours in a silence so thick it could be cut with a knife. Prime Minister Kanaro Suzuki, who had survived multiple assassination attempts for even daring to consider peace negotiations, read the accumulated reports. He couldn't stop his hands from trembling slightly as he placed the documents on the table. "Gentlemen," Suzuki began, we must comprehend what this means. General Korachita Anami, the Minister of War and the most ardent advocate for continuing the fight to the last citizen, was the first to take refuge in denial. American propaganda. They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have. Hiroshima was destroyed by conventional bombing, and they are using deception. 3 aircraft. 3 aircraft, Admiral Toyota interrupted. This was something he would never, ever have done under normal circumstances. His voice was ice. 3 aircraft, Anami-san. Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them. 3. The chilling silence of comprehension fell over the room. The weight of this new reality settled on the generals like volcanic ash. For 3 years, all Japanese military doctrine had been built on a single, unshakable premise. American industrial might could be overcome by Japanese spiritual strength and tactical genius. Yes, the Americans could produce more ships, more planes, more tanks. But Japanese forces would fight with such deadly resolve that American casualties would become politically unbearable. Every strategic decision since Pearl Harbor had been based on this calculation. When American industry produced 300,000 aircraft, Japan's leaders told themselves that Japanese pilots, though outnumbered, would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards launched cargo vessels faster than German U-boats could sink them, Japan consoled itself that American sailors lacked the warrior's heart. But a single bomb that could destroy an entire city whispered a much more nauseating truth. It suggested that American industrial and scientific capacity had reached a level that made Japanese resistance not merely difficult, but utterly meaningless. It suggested that America, while simultaneously fighting a massive war across 2 oceans, had been secretly developing weapons beyond comprehension. It suggested that everything Japan's military leadership believed about the nature of modern warfare had, in that instant, become obsolete and void. Intelligence Officer Colonel Hideaki Sato presented the afternoon's analysis at 1600 hours. Sato's team had been calculating American industrial capacity since 1941, and their numbers had been consistently, terrifyingly accurate. America had produced 88,410 tanks during the war. Japan had produced 6,450. America had built 41 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 15. American shipyards had launched cargo vessels at a speed that outpaced German U-boat sinkings. But Sato's new calculation suggested something that fundamentally broke their understanding of warfare, something beyond all these figures. "If," he said, his voice barely a whisper in the silent room, "if the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they possess scientific capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting." Foreign Minister Togo added the inevitable conclusion that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say aloud. And if they have one such bomb, we must assume they have more. The Japanese understanding of American power had been a fortress of carefully constructed beliefs, built long before Pearl Harbor. These beliefs, documented in countless staff meetings and strategic assessments, would all come crashing down in the days following Hiroshima. But to understand what the High Command finally realized, one must first understand what they had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Ianoku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had provided the most accurate and honest assessment of American industrial capacity that any Japanese leader would offer during the entire war. His warning, recorded in naval staff minutes, was clear and chilling. "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year." Yamamoto had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington. He had toured American factories, witnessing that massive industrial infrastructure firsthand. His calculations were not based on hope or nationalist fervor, but on cold mathematics. America's steel production alone exceeded Japan's total industrial output. Japan's precarious dependence on imports paled in comparison to America's effectively unlimited petroleum reserves. But Yamamoto's warnings were systematically ignored by the very same staff now sitting in that underground bunker, contemplating the ashes of Hiroshima. The Army's strategic planning documents from 1941, as would be seen when they were recovered from archives after the war, revealed the alternative narrative, the comforting illusion that military leadership had embraced. According to this plan, American industrial might would be neutralized by 3 factors. First, distance. Japan's conquests would create a defensive perimeter so vast that American logistics would collapse under its own weight. Every ship, every aircraft, every bullet would have to travel 5,000 miles, 8,000 kilometers, across hostile ocean before reaching combat. Japan would sustain its forces from nearby conquered territories, while America exhausted itself in futile supply chains. Second, morale. American society was soft, individualistic, and rotted by an inability to sustain heavy casualties. Japanese military doctrine assumed that after losing 30,000 to 40,000 men, the American public would beg for peace negotiations. The Japanese soldiers' desire to die would outlast America's desire to fight. Third, tactical superiority. Japanese forces, through superior training, that legendary warrior spirit, Yamato Damashi, and tactical genius, would inflict casualty ratios that made American numerical advantages irrelevant. One Japanese soldier was equal to 3 or 4 Americans in combat. All of these assumptions had been tested and bitterly found wanting in every single bloody engagement of the Pacific War. Yet, the Japanese High Command had stubbornly insisted on reinterpreting defeats not as proof that their theories were fundamentally flawed, but merely as validations requiring minor adjustments. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical errors, not American cryptographic genius or the fatal vulnerability of Japan's carrier-focused strategy. The underlying assumption that Japanese forces could overcome numerical disadvantages miraculously remained intact. From August 1942 to February 1943 at Guadalcanal, Japanese forces learned a bitter lesson. Americans could sustain logistics across vast distances and could match Japanese soldiers in brutal jungle warfare. The official assessment blamed local commanders for showing insufficient fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the strategic situation. The underlying assumption that American society would crack under sustained casualties also remained intact. By August 1945, every major assumption had been systematically demolished by reality. Yet senior leadership had never formally acknowledged this. General Anami's continued advocacy for fighting to the last citizen did not represent stupidity, but the logical endpoint of those blind beliefs that had never been properly questioned. The afternoon of August 6th was the first time Japan's Supreme War Council confronted these illusions directly, nakedly. Intelligence Colonel Sato presented the document his team had compiled over the previous 6 months, a document that had been blocked from presentation until now because it was bad for morale. It was titled, The Reality Assessment. The numbers were not just devastating, they were humiliating. America's aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards were building escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition factories produced more shells in a week than Japan's factories produced in a month. But Sato's most crushing, most soul-destroying statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research facilities employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's entire effort in this field employed approximately 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, individually had larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. The atomic bomb, Sato explained, required facilities that we could not have built even if we had known how. The Americans built entire cities in secret. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. These facilities consumed more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire war budget for 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the inevitable question that would echo through subsequent war crimes, trials, and historical analyses. How could we not know? Sato's answer spread a wave of shame through the room. It was uncomfortable but honest. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific recruitment efforts. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know, because to know would require acknowledging that we could not win. Admiral Toyota added his own bitter assessment. His voice was that of a man accepting defeat. The Americans, he said, fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan simultaneously while developing weapons we cannot comprehend. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible while maintaining their civilian economy at levels that exceeded peacetime production. They are not merely stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization. This admission that America represented not just greater strength, but a different category of capability, marked the fundamental shift in understanding. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb proved this narrative to be a catastrophic, tragic, and fatal lie. The psychological impact extended far beyond simple military calculation. Cabinet Secretary Hitsune Sakumizu recorded in his diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society functioned as ours functioned, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7, 1945, began with confirmations that made Hiroshima even more incomprehensible. Reconnaissance aircraft that finally managed to penetrate the radiation zone transmitted photographs that would circulate among the high command within hours. Major Sune Kitamura, the pilot who flew the first successful reconnaissance mission, reported weather conditions he had never encountered. Horrific updrafts that threw his aircraft 2,000 feet, 600 meters, higher in seconds, sudden air temperatures that spiked his instruments, and visibility completely obscured by smoke that rose in a single column to the stratosphere. The photographs, developed by 11 o'clock hours, showed something that military analysts initially refused to believe. The city center, approximately 4 square miles, 10 square kilometers, had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the conventional sense, where rubble and building foundations remained, but flattened down to the bare earth. Structures had been vaporized. The reconnaissance team estimated that everything within a 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, radius of the blast center had ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these images to the worst devastation they knew. The most devastating conventional raid of the war, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9th to 10th, 1945, had required 334 B-29 bombers, 1,665 tons of incendiaries, and 3 hours of hell. The destruction of Hiroshima, accomplished by a single bomb from a single aircraft in a single instant, surpassed even that raid's devastation. The Supreme War Council reconvened at 1400 hours on August 7th with new intelligence that now irrevocably altered the strategic landscape. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had summoned Japanese Ambassador Nawatake Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was brief. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan, effective August 9th, 1945. This announcement tore apart Japan's final strategic hope, that last thread of possibility. For months, Japanese diplomacy had worked desperately to negotiate Soviet mediation for peace terms. The fantasy was this: Stalin, never fully trusted by his American and British allies, might broker an arrangement that preserved some Japanese territory and prevented a humiliating occupation. The Soviets entering the war completely, fundamentally annihilated this possibility. According to multiple witnesses, General Anami's face went white as he registered the implication. Japan now faced enemies on all fronts, with no prospect of a negotiated settlement. American atomic weapons from the east, Soviet armies from the north, British Commonwealth forces from the south, and continuing Chinese resistance in occupied territories. The empire that had once stretched from the borders of India to the mid-Pacific was being compressed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo laid the naked reality on the table. We have three choices: surrender unconditionally, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan ceases to exist as a nation. There are no other options. August 8th brought fragmentary intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a massive assault into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Kwantung Army, once the elite formation of Japanese military power, was being systematically annihilated. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles, 80 kilometers, on the first day. The resistance they met collapsed like paper before forces that had learned their trade destroying Nazi Germany. The Manchurian operation demonstrated another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were equipped with thousands of American vehicles, trucks, and communications equipment, provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial capacity had not only sustained its own forces across two oceans, but had also equipped its allies on a scale that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. A single American program, Lend-Lease, had provided more material to Soviet forces than Japan's entire industrial output for the war. And on August 9th, at 11:02 hours, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The communication from the Nagasaki Regional Command was even briefer than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack. City destroyed. Casualties catastrophic. Then, that same terrible silence. The Supreme War Council's emergency session that afternoon descended into something unprecedented in Japanese military protocol. The open, aloud acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsuma Masa Jonai spoke with a remarkable, almost brutal candor for a military officer in that environment. The Americans have demonstrated that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. They have demonstrated the capability to continue this indefinitely. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot detect until they detonate. Our anti-aircraft systems are now irrelevant. Our fighter aircraft cannot intercept what they cannot find. Our civil defense preparations are meaningless. Army Chief of Staff General Umezu added his own assessment, one that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. The atomic bomb changes fundamental military calculations. Concentrated forces are now targets. Cities are targets. Our strategy of fighting to the last citizen assumes the Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without an invasion, our entire defensive doctrine becomes obsolete. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever setting foot on our soil. Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that America likely possessed between 3 and 7 additional atomic bombs, with the production capacity for more. Even if this estimate was high, even if America possessed only one more weapon, the strategic implication remained identical. Continued resistance was suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakumitsu recorded the Emperor's private comments from an audience that evening. His Majesty expressed that the unendurable must be endured. The atomic bombs have demonstrated that continued resistance will result in the complete annihilation of the Japanese people. We must accept terms that preserve the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond measure. The phrase, "the unendurable must be endured," would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. But the path from this private imperial acknowledgement to actual surrender would require navigating the military opposition that remained fierce despite the overwhelming evidence. August 10th brought the formal Japanese surrender offer, transmitted through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was conditional. Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration terms, provided the emperor's sovereignty was maintained. The American response, delivered on August 12th, was deliberately ambiguous. The emperor would be subject to the supreme commander of Allied powers, but his ultimate status would be determined by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This ambiguity created the final crisis. Military hardliners, led by General Anami, interpreted this as unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite the atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on any prospect of victory, but on preserving national honor through destruction rather than accepting occupation and foreign judgment. The surrender formalities extended through late August and early September 1945, but the psychological transformation of the Japanese High Command was complete by August 16th. What followed was not merely a military defeat, but a comprehensive re-evaluation of everything Japanese leadership had believed about modern warfare, industrial capacity, and their own place in the global order. The formal surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, brought the Japanese representatives face to face with the physical, crushing manifestation of the American power they had consistently underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his impressions in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as one could see. Hundreds of vessels. Aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats, but through simple presence. This armada represented only a fraction of their total military force, yet it exceeded everything Japan possessed at the peak of our strength. General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted that the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American yards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was just one of dozens of capital ships they constructed while simultaneously fighting across 2 oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force began arriving in late August, and Japanese military observers documented the details that reinforced their new, painful understanding. The equipment, organization, and logistics displayed capabilities that previous intelligence reports had accurately described, but which the High Command had refused to credit. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army possessed. American supply operations delivered fresh food to frontline troops, while Japanese forces had been starving for months. American medical facilities routinely treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato compiled his final report in September 1945, titled "Why We Lost," an assessment of strategic miscalculation written with brutal honesty. The document, now preserved in Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, laid the truth bare. We lost the war in December 1941, when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle thereafter was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was effectively unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we could not sustain. We fought believing spirit could overcome material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration, led by General Douglas MacArthur, provided Japanese officials with access to information about American war production that confirmed even their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. More staggering, they had accomplished this while maintaining civilian living standards that exceeded Japan's peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in conversations recorded by American occupation historians, articulated what the Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain a mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible. The details of the Manhattan Project, gradually revealed to Japanese scientists through occupation channels, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It required constructing facilities that consumed more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't imagined possible. The atomic bomb wasn't merely a weapon. It was jarring proof of a scientific and industrial capacity that placed America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong, but precisely backwards. This psychological devastation manifested in various ways among the military leadership. Some, like General Anami, chose death, traditional seppuku, rather than live with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. Others, like Admiral Yonai, became the strongest advocates for complete demilitarization, arguing that Japan's militaristic culture had led the country into catastrophic strategic blindness. Most simply struggled for the rest of their lives to reconcile the legendary warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they had led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians, working under occupation supervision, began documenting how thoroughly the correct intelligence reports had been ignored. Honest assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific capabilities had been suppressed as harmful to morale. Every piece of evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as a temporary setback requiring more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created a closed echo chamber where truth became treason and blind optimism became policy. The final lesson the Japanese high command absorbed was perhaps the bitterest of all. American power had not even been fully deployed in this war. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while maintaining substantial forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, and preparing for potential conflicts that might follow. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort, but what they could accomplish while simultaneously doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with the total commitment of every last resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins, everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with the former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Umezu's testimony to occupation, historians summarized what the Japanese High Command had finally understood. We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our own weaknesses, limited resources, a narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking, when they possessed the exact opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final, jarring proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended. We learned too late that courage cannot defeat chemistry, spirit cannot overcome steel, and determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form.